And God stepped out on space, and he looked around and said, I'm lonely. I'll make me a world. And far as the eye of God could see, darkness covered everything, blacker than 100 midnights down in a cypress swamp. Then God smiled, and the light broke, and the darkness rolled up on one side, and the light stood shining on the other. And God said, that's good. Those words are the opening lines of a poem by James Weldon Johnson, with whom some taint of irony may spring from this post because of his authorship of Lift Every Voice and Sing, which today, set to score by his brother, is known as the Negro National Anthem. But these particular opening lines are from The Creation, also called a Negro sermon, from back in the days when we was colored. And on an unseasonably warm Sunday in March 1980, I, attired in my father's black robe, spoke those words in his pulpit at the Monumental Baptist Church in Jersey City, New Jersey, in a command performance of a dramatic production that our daily vacation Bible school class had performed the previous summer, under the direction of a member of our church and relative by marriage to a descendant of Mary McLeod Bethiel. Then God reached out and took the light in his hands, and God rolled the light around in his hands until he made the sun. And he set that sun a-blazing in the heavens, and the light that was left from making the sun, God gathered it up in a shining ball and flung it against the darkness, spangling the night with the moon and the stars. Then down between the darkness and the light, he hurled the world. And God said, that's good. These were the words I spoke. These were the words. And on that Sunday morning, more than any other in my father's pioneering and miraculous church that sprung up an oasis of promise in one of the most depressed areas in my hometown, I felt like I had genuinely walked through history. It was not just the Johnson poem that I spoke or the pedigree of our director, nor was it the parallel recital by my niece of the Langston Hughes poem Life Ain't Been No Crystal Stair, and the choral accompaniment of traditional Negro spirituals interlaced in our unfolding drama. No, what made the day a grand memory was the presence of several visitors to our church that day in testament of faith, true faith. Then God reached out and took the light in his hands, and God rolled the light around in his hands until he made the sun. And he set that sun a-blazing in the heavens, and the light that was left from making the sun, God gathered it up in a shining ball and flung it against the darkness, spangling the night with the moon and the stars. Then down between the darkness and the light, he hurled the world. And God said, that's good. In Mosaic law, I was recently reminded in a sermon by Reverend Howard John Wesley, a pastor of the historic Alfred Street Baptist Church in Old Town, Alexandria. A person's testimony required at least two substantiating and corroborating witnesses to be accepted irrefutably as true. And in testimony to my faith, on that Sunday morning, my freshman year science teacher at St. Peter's Prep in Jersey City and several members of that class sacrificed a long Sunday morning to attend a church service in a Black Baptist church just to give me support and encouragement for my small part in a grander, far grander, passionate play. Then he stopped and looked and saw that the earth was hot and barren. So God stepped over the edge of the world and he spat out the seven seas. He batted his eyes and the lightnings flashed. He clapped his hands and the thunders rolled. and the waters above the earth came down. The cooling waters came down. But sitting on that pulpit with me, as God and my Father in heaven, the Congregation for the Causes of Saints in our church membership, and the delegation from my science class are my eternal and true witness, were two men from Georgia. Dr. Lewis Sullivan, who would later become the Secretary of Health and Human Services under President George Bush, to whom he would introduce my father aboard Air Force One, and also the recently resigned U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations and protege of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Andrew Young. Both came to church that Sunday. Uncle Louis was bringing a plea for support from a church not to build a government building to keep our heritage and history under lock and key, granting us conjugal visits upon reservation, but to start a medical college at a historically black college and university, enabling people of color to enable their kindred. But Andy had another purpose, brought from another authority. Then the green grass sprouted, and the little red flowers blossomed. The pine tree pointed his finger to the sky, and the oak spread out his arms. The lakes cuddled down in the hollows of ground, and the rivers ran down to the sea. And God smiled again, and the rainbow appeared and curled itself around his shoulder. Ambassador Young, Handy Andy was on hand, notwithstanding the prohibitions of the Johnson Amendment, which was sponsored by the founder of the Great Society, the author of the War on Poverty, and the signer of the Voting Rights Act, in the same year as the school board case brought on behalf of a third-grade girl of color named Linda from Topeka, Kansas, to the United States Supreme Court, and a measure nonetheless passed by a Republican Congress and signed by a Republican president, came to speak on the topic never mentioned in the debates or words of that amendment that was introduced to punish a rival to the path to power, and as a means of ascent, to borrow the phrases from John Cairo, LBJ's most popular biographer. At the behest of Dr. Benjamin Mays, the mentor of Dr. King, and for his friend, a former Georgia governor, Sunday school teacher, and peanut farmer who confessed to lust in his heart, several black church pastors, including my father, were asked to permit Handy Andy, to encourage their membership to save a failed presidency whose most dramatic failure was on the television news every day: the captivity of American diplomats in the terrorist state of Iran. Then God raised his arm, and he waved his hand over the sea and over the land. And he said, bring forth, bring forth. And quicker than God could drop his hand, fishes and fowls and beasts and birds swam the rivers and the seas, roamed the forest and the woods, and split the air with their wings. And God said, that's good. Notwithstanding the Johnson Amendment emotive proscriptions separating church from state, Democrat politicians never left the black church once they recognized its power and potential. The slave codes that had once prohibited the education of the oppressed, stripped them of rights to assembly in faith or expression, and on fear of armed rebellion, prohibited their means of lethal defense, were re-examined by Dixiecrats who never left the Democratic Party to perpetuate their dominion with a New Deal. The plantation that once picked cotton could now be used as a new Camelot to pick presidents, offering token-free education, subsistence, and convenience in exchange for population control and voter loyalty. The plantations of the Old South and Confederacy found a reconstruction and reconciliation. Therein. Then God walked around, and God looked around on all that he had made. He looked at his sun, and he looked at his moon, and he looked at his little stars. He looked on his world with all its living things, and God said, I'm lonely still. Throughout a life of uncommon luck, gracing privilege, I have witnessed the courtship dance of liberal Democrats with their beloved little brown brothers in church pews across a vast nation. Some black leaders have derived a benefit from the base constituency powers that made possible the advocacy in the civil rights struggle, but also the ascendancy of some black politicians who were exceptions to the rule in their defiance of their master's yoke. They, without exception, knew that God blesses the child who's got his own. But the majority were short-sighted, finding their ascent as the final prize symbolic, in value only to an appeased and docile mass. Accordingly, they heeded not the warnings of Reverend Jesse Jackson when he appeared at the Republican National Committee in the same year that Andy spoke in my father's pulpit. But Jesse, the Reverend Jackson, told people of color to make themselves politically necessary so that one party could not take them for granted, while another party wrote them off. Then God sat down on the side of a hill where he could think. By a deep, wide river he sat down, with his head in his hands. He thought and thought, till he thought, I'll make me a man. If indeed one of the chief functions of the church, in even a modern society, is to inform our consciences and encourage our moral spirit, there is no reason to preclude that exercise of merit from our political processes and experience. How else might a people summon its higher angels to do those great things and more? James Madison in The Federalist recognized that all men were not angels, and so required some deliberate effort to temper their spirit and conduct, at least through establishment of government. And John Adams wrote, our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other. This is the rock upon which we have built our church and state. Let not the gates of hell prevail against it. Up from the bed of the river, God scooped the clay, and by the bank of the river, he kneeled him down. And there, the great God Almighty, who lit the sun and fixed it in the sky, who flung the stars to the most far corners of the night, who rounded the earth in the middle of his hand, this great God, like a mammy bending over her baby, kneeled down in the dust, toiling over a lump of clay, till he shaped it in his own image. Then into it he blew the breath of life, and man became a living soul. Amen. Amen. So let us end this era of hope is gone. Let us stop burning flags. Stop refusing to stand for our national anthem. Stop booing our God in heaven. And stop denying the rule of our president. And so may a God of our weary years, a God of our silent tears, thou who hast brought us thus far on our way, thou who hast by thy might led us into the light, keep us forever in the path we pray. Politicians will say anything. This advertisement was authorized by Mike Webb. Honest.